thank you for listening, and those who can see, and please God, those who not seeing it at this moment, we're going to send it out. And thanks to Tolly and Esther, Kevin, Marge. At least we have regulars. It's fantastic. So I think this is such an important topic. And that topic is the ability to say no. That is the key to a human being. And we have it later on, but it says in Koheles, Umota Hadam Mina Bahema Ayin. Man is mota, more than an animal. Ayin, and the word ayin is not, right? Like in as if to say man is not much more than an animal. But if you can read it, man is more than an animal, ayin, the word no, to be able to say no, to be able to control yourself. So this last week's Parsha, which we had on the day after Shavuos, has so many very beautiful Parshot. And the first, one of them is the Parsha of Soter. What's a Soter? Is an unchaste woman. Unchaste woman means that her husband sees that her wife is hanging around too much with other people. So he warns her, and he notices one particular person says, I don't want you to be alone with this person. And he warns her, and she doesn't listen. So the halacha is that he's allowed to bring her to the Beis HaMikdash. Over love ruach kina, he has this jealousy, and he brings her, and he gives her to drink from the Maim Ma'orim, that waters which can cause bitterness. They're not bitter waters because they're holy waters, but the Rashi says they can cause bitterness to her. If she's found to be not good, then it says thighs swell and chest, or thighs go down, the chest, the stomach swells, and unfortunately she succumbs to that. If not, then and she makes the shavua that she hasn't done anything wrong and nothing happens. So then out of that comes good, that if she's had difficult childbirth, if she hasn't had children, now she will have children. We have good children and easy births. And that's the Parsha of the Sotah. Interesting that the Torah has all these different Parshiot, because it's part of human life. That's the way Hashem made us. Then comes straight away the Parsha of Nazir. Why is the Parsha of Nazir and Nazirite straight afterwards? So who's a Nazir? So a Nazir is a person who says, for 30 days, I'm not going to drink wine. I'm not going to go to a cemetery, and he's got to grow his hair. And it's what's very interesting is that he becomes on a very high madrega, a very high level. And Nazir, Nazirite, and Nazir is also like a crown. It's the crown of being a Nazirite. In other words, he gives himself a religious injection. Right. So now the question is, why is the two Parshios in juxtaposition? Why is it one next to the other? So Rashi says, brings down to the Medrash, it says, Lama Niskwa, why is it together? To come tell us if a person sees Soter Bekil Kula, sees her in her despair, then then he should go and he immediately not drink wine.
Much stronger.
So can you hear me, right? So the question is, well, why is it necessary for him to become a Nazir? I mean, if you see a person doing something wrong and then a person gets punished, so crime doesn't pay. So what's the answer? The answer is that although crime doesn't pay, but the person thinks I'm going to be smarter than the police or smarter than being caught, and you know, I'll get away with it. So I have that the one story, especially people from Santon have heard it sometime or the other, is that there was a village, and the village, after they, every Friday, when they got paid, so the men folk, some of them got home, and some of them landed up in the tavern, and their wives had to go fetch them. They used to like to drink. And then after a while, the mayor got so upset. He says, you know what I'm going to do? He says, I want, and he made a date on a Sunday afternoon. He wants the entire town to come and to be in the stadium. So they all came to the stadium there. And there was one fella that they filled him up with liquor. And then they took him into the middle of the stadium, and they poured some water on the ground, and they left him. The guy got up, and he walked, and he fell, and he stumbled, and he wallowed in this dust, and everybody was looking, and the mayor was sitting there, you know, very smug. He says, now these guys are going to see what it is when you are a real shikar. Suddenly, one of the people ran over to the drunk. So he says, must have been one of his relatives. He's going to say, you know, Mac, he says, how can you do this? How can you do this to your family? How can you shame your family in front of, you know, hundreds of people? So they quick and they put a recorder next to what the guy was saying. The guy was talking to Mac, and then Mac sort of mumbled something. And then he says, okay, now we're going to play the recording. They played the recording. What did it say? The guy says, Mac, where did you get such good whiskey, right? He was so drunk that the guy, he really must have enjoyed that whiskey. So you see that when people, when they see something which has gone wrong, unfortunately, they think, well, you know, he had a good time until he was caught, or he had a good time until he became a spectacle. But you know what I'm going to do? He says, I'm going to take that whiskey and I'm going to enjoy it, but I'll make sure that the mayor and his cronies don't see me. So that's why the Torah says if a person sees someone who's doing something which is incorrect, he should become a nausea and take a spiritual injection. So could be this is one of the ways. We're going to say several ways, but we'll bring it out at the very end. One of the ways is that sometimes you need a spiritual injection to keep you from saying no. What's interesting is the same idea where people fall and they do things which they're not supposed to do. There's a famous, I'm not sure if it was Aristotle and the Rambam, or Aristotle and the Ramban, that he was a great scholar, the Greek scholar, and one of the great rabbis. And he said that a human being and an animal are the same. That's what he says. He says, you know what you do? He says, I can take any animal and I can teach him manners, and he'll have manners like a human being. And so he says, you know what? He says, I'm going to invite you to a dinner. Made a dinner of his friends and asked the rabbi to come. And he says, and I'm going to do something with a group of cats. They came there, they all sat at the table. All the cats came in, they bowed down. They all were dressed with a white apron. And they started serving the first course, the second course, the third course. And they mowed and they mooed and they mooed and that. But everything, they were like excellent waiters. So Aristotle turned to the Rav and he says, you see what I told you? He says, you can take a cat and you can teach this cat to be a waiter, and you can teach them manners. So, but the Rambam was prepared, and he said it was a cat's banquet. So he had a little cage, and he took the cage out, and out jumped a mouse, and it ran in on top of the table. All the cats went crazy to get this mice, right? To show that so easy that they couldn't say no, right? They couldn't say no. They weren't human beings. And that's why we said, we will say it a few times, umosar and umotar, adam min bahema, ayin is the ability to say no. The person has to be able to go through life in saying no. So what's very interesting is there are 248 positive mitzvahs. Out of all those positive mitzvahs, a woman has maybe 3-4 positive mitzvahs. Mitzvahs, I say. But there are 365 negative mitzvahs. And a woman has to keep as much, just about, if possible, mitzvahs of a negative kind, just like a man. So why is it? Why did Hashem make this ratio? And even in the ratio, it was possible to leave out a woman from the major mitzvahs, I say, from the positive mitzvahs. And the answer is that there are so many lavim in the Torah. There are so many negative mitzvahs in the Torah that a person knows, I'm allowed to eat, but I'm not allowed to eat prawns. I'm allowed to work, but not Shabbos and Yom Tov. I'm allowed to shave, but I shouldn't take a razor. I'm allowed to do this, I'm allowed to do that, but there are 365 restrictions. So a person gets, from the young age, that's why there's a mitzvah to teach children from a young age, the ability to say no. That's just a wonderful idea. The ability to say no, the ability to control oneself, the ability to stop and not do something when, when a person's tempted to. And if you see in the papers all the time, you see people who are presidents, people who are of high position, people who have so much covered and rich and everything, and they make a mistake. And they land up either shaming themselves or their family, and some, we know, land up in jail, right? And it's just a moment's weakness, right? But if a person is learned to say no, so he can hold himself. But imagine, like we had one president, the United States, that he had everything. He had wealth, he had a family, he had power, as if the most powerful man on earth, right? Controlling America and halfway just about controlling the world. And yet they still did something wrong, sexually wrong. Why? Because, it came out that opportunity to have that little bit of pleasure and a little bit of fun, right? And they let their head down. But they didn't hold on to that which was correct. But you find by Bnei Israel that it's so much different. So that I feel is one of the ikorim, one of the main things, that a person teaches people, teaches their children, person's a teacher, to say that you have to know wrong for right. You have to be in control. How do you do it? You have to train. Just like a person wants to be a runner, a person wants to be a soccer player, a person wants to be a pianist, the more you practice, the more you train, the more you do these things, so then you're in control. You're absolutely in control of yourself, because you're doing the right thing, and you're doing the right thing all the time. So when it comes to that moment when you're alone and nobody's there, and we mentioned it, we gave a shiur on Shavuos night. It says that Ruth was alone with Boaz. You remember, she went, Naomi told her to go to Boaz, and she slept by his feet, and suddenly he woke up, and he said, "Who are you?" And she said who she was, and then he said to her, "Have you been to the mikveh?" And she says, "I'm tall," and a few questions that he asked, and really there was just very, very little to stop him from from marrying her. I mean, he's going to marry her anyway. He ran, right? They didn't have their chuppah and kedushin, right? But but he controlled himself. Both of them controlled himself. What was the outcome? The outcome was that they were the parents, the great grandparents of David HaMelech. Man, what a schus, right? For eternity, they are named as the family who gave birth eventually to David HaMelech, to the king of Israel, and it's going to be the Mashiach. So but where did it come from? It came because they were on that level of being able to control themselves, and that was Ruth, and that's why really she's the one of the Hirions, the Hirion of the night of Shavuos, right? A woman. Why? Because she went with a mother-in-law. She didn't just let her go by herself. She, your people be my people. When you go, I will go. When you will sleep, I will sleep. But she had that strength of character. Where does it come from? And I really believe that this is the truth. The truth is, it comes from the Torah. It comes from the practice of the Torah. So we're saying something a little bit different. Now we're going to say something which comes from the actual teachings of the Torah. Where do you find another great event? Is that with Yosef Atzadik? That you remember Yosef Atzadik, that Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him time and time again, until one time that, according to one opinion, is that he came and he was ready to do something wrong. And he says at that moment, he saw Demut Diyukno. He saw the image of his father in the chalon, in the window. And that stopped him from doing the sin. So we once embellished on this when we talked about it in a different time. He says that Yosef was known of Masalsa Basaro. He used to like to comb his hair. He used to look good. This was even when he was a youngster, before he was sold by the brothers. And then, of course, that he was the viceroy in Egypt. So most probably he dressed and he looked like Egyptian. Of course, a rich guy, so he dressed accordingly. So, but when he was in Potiphar's house, right? So he also was, let's say one of the boys, as if to say, right? And then he saw his father's image. So what does it mean he saw his father's image? He saw his father's image, that he saw an older man with a beard, with payas, with tzitzis, if they wore it at that time. So so that stopped him from doing the sin. So the Torah itself, if the person's a ben Torah, then they sort of know better. And well, that's why there's laws of yichud, not to be alone, and there's laws of where you shouldn't be tempted to do something. Maybe I'll tell a cute little vort that I always like to say it over. It's pity I've got to get Nathan Nosovsky onto this panel. But I remember that once he said, what happens if a woman goes to the shop? Here they're going to Osha'ad. In South Africa, they just came from one of the butchers from Maxi or from Pick and Pay, and they bought a chicken. And they see, that the chicken is not a kosher chicken. So what does the woman do? She wraps it up. It's already Friday afternoon. She's not going to run back to Glen Hazel. So she'll put it into the fridge and she'll go after Shabbos. So the chicken's there in the fridge and she's at home. And so the question is, there's laws of yichud, that a person's not allowed to be at home with, let's say, or go away with somebody else, another woman, not a wife or whatever it is. And there it's asur, forbidden. So the halacha should be that she should take the chicken and throw it out, or at least give it to her native girl. In South Africa it means her help. and say, you keep the chicken in your fridge until I pick it up, right? I won't be afraid that she's going to eat the chicken during the week or the Shabbos, especially if, let's say, especially if it's a smoked chicken, it's already been made. So Nathan said such a good word. He says that when there's a man and it's a woman, both are thinking of the same thing. So you have two forces to get away from. Over here, you may want to eat the chicken, but the chicken doesn't say, come eat me, So take the chicken. So the chicken is, you're safe for the chicken, because the chicken is going to continue to keep quiet and freeze in the fridge until afterwards. But the Torah teaches us what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. So there's also a famous Gemara, the Gemara in Suchard that we have mentioned, that the Gemara says in the Osir Lova, in the world to come, at the end of time, when Hashem is going to finally shech the Yetzer Hara. So the Gemara says that the tzaddikim, the righteous people, and the Rishoyim, and the wicked are going to be there at this tremendous act of Yetzer Hara being finally annihilated. And the Gemara says, Halolo bochim v'halo bochim, that these cry and these cry. So the tzaddikim cry that they see that it was like a mountain, this Yetzer Hara. The Rishoyim, they cry because they see it was like a thread, a plain cotton thread. That's how thick it was. It wasn't a string, wasn't a rope, it wasn't a rope that you hold back a ship. It was like a thread. That was a Yetzer Hara. So why does the Rishoyim cry? The cry is, look how easy it was. Hashem says, don't do this, and he puts a thread in front of it. So you stay away. And it's such a easy thing to break a thread. It wasn't a great burden to be able to something to be able to overcome. You could overcome it. So they're going to cry because they had such an opportunity and they let it go. Those people who are the tzaddikim, they're going to cry because it was like a mountain. It's like a mountain because first Hashem says, gives them one temptation. So they overcome it. Then Hashem says, let me give him something else. Let me give him something else until it becomes a mountain. And they were able to overcome this mountain. So they cry out of happiness. Imagine such a mountain, so difficult, and yet, Baruch Hashem, I was able to overcome it. And they were able to, therefore, each cry, one from happiness and tears of joy, and the others are tears of sadness. But that's the challenge of life. The challenge of life is many things happen, and we're sorry that happened. We make mistakes, and there are challenges, and the person should just see to it that he overcomes it. That's the challenge, to overcome any obstacle in life, and that's the ability to say no. I can't stress how important it is, because sometimes we have to be able to say no. Where, it could be a person's on Tel Aviv beach, or you can be on Durban beach, and it's a hot day, and they're serving ice cream, and you sweating, and you just finished playing volleyball, and you feel, I need an ice cream. And then you say, Baruch Hashem, the guy comes selling ice cream. Then you look for a heksher, you don't see a badatz or some sofa or BD over there. But you say, what could be in it? What could be in it? Nothing. It's kosher, and you succumb to it. And then one example after example after example. And but the way to curtail our desire to do something which is incorrect and to hold on to that which is correct is practice makes perfect. 365 no's. You keep those no's, There'll be a time when you are tested. It's easy. I've kept 365 no's. I could have gone on Shabbos somewhere. I didn't go. Could have done this. I didn't do it. And you think again, how is a man greater than an animal? The ability to say no. And then also the mitzvahs of the Torah, they are there to keep us in a little bit in a straitjacket, the straight and the narrow, to do the right. And if we do all these things, then we'll be able to say no at the right time, say yes at the right time. And we should all be zocher for good things. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it's something worthwhile.